Hello, and once again, this is Father Rich Snow with St. Timothy's Episcopal Church in Alexandria, Louisiana. This time bringing you a short sermon for Proper 19, you see. Our readings for today are Jeremiah 4, 11 through 12, and 22 through 28. Psalm 14. Our epistle comes from 1 Timothy 1, 12 through 17, and our gospel lesson is Luke 15, 1 through 10. While I was in college, the first time around, and for many years after, I would drive to Billings, Montana to spend Thanksgiving with my youngest sister and her family. The year after my father died, I even took my mother with me. She rode Amtrak from Evanston, Wyoming to Laramie, Wyoming, where I went to school, and we drove up to Billings together. But that's another story for another time. One year, after my wife Nick and I were married, our middle child Samuel, who was not much more than a toddler at the time, got lost. We were all in the house, and our kids and my sister's kids were playing, and at some point, Samuel was simply nowhere to be found. I'm sure most of you have been there at one point or another, or can at least relate in some way. You search the house, calling out for the child. You start to panic and begin looking outside in the yard, up and down the street. And eventually, as my brother-in-law Levi did, someone starts driving through the neighborhood. You begin checking every closet and every space in the house a second and a third time. You get closer and closer to the point where you may have to call the police and, God forbid, report a missing child. You begin to panic, and dread sets in. Luckily, we found Samuel before we reached the point of calling the police. He was asleep in a toy box in a back bedroom under a mass of stuffed animals. And of course, we rejoiced at Samuel's being found, crying happy tears and praising God. Today's gospel lesson, and as described by the Collegeville commentary, is bound together by the theme of joy over the recovery of what was lost. We hear two parables, both of which apply to the return of the repentant sinner. Jesus, surrounded by tax collectors and sinners who came near to listen to him, causes murmuring among the scribes and Pharisees. "This fellow welcomes sinners and eats with them," they grumbled. Addressing his listeners directly, Jesus states, What man among you, and shares two parables, that of a lost sheep and that of a lost coin. Now, going after the one lost sheep is not actually what many of us would do, but the attractiveness of this extravagant individual concern makes us, the listeners, want to agree. In a split second, we're drawn into God's world, seeing and acting as he would. The shepherd's joy is like God's joy, his dedication to the individual sheep, carrying it back to the flock, is a reflection of God's love. A different image is used in the second parable to the same effect. The woman has lost one of her 10 coins. She turns her house upside down in search of this one coin in 10. We could speculate why, but the point is, her joy is like the joy in heaven over one repentant sinner. It needs to be shared. It is too great for one person. Thus, as we heard, both she and the shepherd invite their friends and neighbors for the Thanksgiving party. Now, we could ask ourselves, what about the other 9 silver pieces and the 99 sheep? Are they not important too? Well, surely, but the joy of the kingdom breaks out of the ordinary categories of reason and good business. What was given up as lost has been found. It's like a new life, a resurrection, and it must be celebrated. As the Reverend Amy Richter describes it, Jesus teaches that the angels of God rejoice when even one person who is lost is found, when even one person repents, comes home, allows God to embrace them and say, "You are mine, I love you." I would search and search the whole world if I had to, even for just one. Jesus told these parables because at the time a group of people were grumbling about what kind of people Jesus was busy finding what kind of people Jesus was inviting to the table and eating with. These grumbling people were themselves religious people, sure that they themselves were safely in God's fold, safely deposited into God's change purse. Maybe they didn't realize that they too were lost, ones that God was trying hard to gather up. Did they know that God was turning the world upside down to find tax collectors and sinners as well as good religious people, to claim us all as God's own sheep, God's own precious coins? The fact of the matter is that on a regular basis, each of us turns out to be lost sheep. Each of us, on occasion, the precious coin that disappears, or the child who went sleeping at the bottom of a pile of stuffed animals. Fortunately for us, we can take comfort in the knowledge that God will search for us like a housewife tearing the place apart and searching every dark corner, like a family searching an entire house and neighborhood up and down the street. This happens in our respectable lives again and again and again. And my brothers and sisters, thanks be to God for that. Invite your friends and let's celebrate. Amen.